Do we need mushroom startup companies to help us decompose our corpses and our feces? I've been thinking about this question a lot lately. And over the past 10 years, I've seen a number of companies emerge claiming to use fungi in novel ways to help us better decompose our dead bodies and our poo. And I say better because we know that manure and dead bodies will decompose in most environments. Fungi are everywhere. So are bacteria, microbes, nematodes, insects, and whole ecosystems that will help us decompose these materials. So what are these companies claiming to do? How are these claims supported by scientific evidence? Or is there any scientific evidence? And sort of what is the public perception of what mushrooms can do and our relationship to dead bodies and poo? This is a video that I've wanted to make for a while. I'm going to talk about 6 companies that I have thought about a lot, and from my experience as a mushroom cultivator, how I feel about some of these companies and some of the limitations in how we think about these problems and we think about these solutions. When a for-profit company is doing work with fungi that has an impact on our environment, that demands a level of responsibility and accountability that also extends to me. I grow mushrooms and I sell those mushrooms for a living in different ways. So my work is not above scrutiny. So when I talk about this work, I'm going to attempt to bring the consideration and balance that I would hope someone would give me if scrutinizing my work. My understanding of fungi is always evolving. The scientific community's understanding of fungi is always evolving. I have said things about fungi that if you were to had recorded them years ago and played them back for me, I probably would be mortified because I make mistakes all the time. So this is not to dunk on other mycologists who are getting things wrong, but I think that there are tremendous consequences to the work in this video, even with dead corpses and poo. So I think we need to talk about them very critically, and I think more of that critical discussion is needed. I want to make it very clear that I am not a myco-pessimist. I'm not making this video to say that all these companies and their ideas and the things that they say and do with fungi are hogwash and it should all be dismissed. That's not my intention. I love fungi. I do all of my work with fungi at this time, and I have some pretty far out ideas myself, and I believe that a deepened relationship with fungi can make the planet a better place. But I'm also not going to take their word at everything that they say when these companies make a claim. I have personal experience growing mushrooms. I have understandings about fungi that are very different than some of the things that I see on social media and how these things are talked about. I'm also not a scientist. I'm not a toxicologist. I don't have a PhD in science. So I'm not an authority to talk about, pollution in our water system. I believe these things are really complicated. I don't believe in these simplistic ideas where we throw mushrooms at all of our wildfires and all of our problems and climate change just goes away and we can sprinkle these special packets of spore dust on mountains of plastic water bottles and it all just breaks down into a healthy loam that supports our old growth forests. I see kind of streaks of this kind of sentiment online, and it's just not really based in reality. But fungi are really important, and there's a lot of nuance even in my skepticism with how I think about some of these concepts and some of these companies. The infinity burial suit becomes internationally known after a 2008 TED Talk when its creator, J. Rim Lee, comes out on stage in this designer black suit.
So I'm here to explain why I'm wearing these ninja pajamas.
Begins her talk by making a emotional appeal to our concerns over the toxins that enter our body, BPAs and prescription drugs, things that disrupt our hormones, and that we are responsible for and victim to these pollutants that destroy our bodies and follow us into our grave, continuing to pollute the planet long after we're dead, how our burial practices with embalming fluids are incredibly damaging to the planet, how cremation releases all this mercury into our atmosphere. And I have no objections to any of these concerns. These are very real concerns, and I think that there's very interesting questions around how we should be thinking about burial practices that are more sustainable. However, things get a little rocky when Jay Rimley starts to talk about mushrooms. And this burial suit is embedded with the spores of very popular gourmet wood eating white rot mushrooms such as shiitake, enoki, oyster mushrooms, very popular gourmet mushrooms that are farmed, that many people have a very positive association with. These are mushrooms that are very versatile. They're great in barbecue, soups, really anything as a protein replacement for meat. But the thing about these mushrooms that Jay Rimley is using is these are white rot mushrooms that eat primarily hardwoods. Some of them are versatile and they'll eat woody material if lignin and the right cellulose is available. It doesn't always have to be hardwoods, but they're not evolved to eat human flesh. They're not cannibals. They don't eat dead animals. You find these mushrooms on logs. They're grown on logs. They're grown on sawdust. So that's a bit odd, but it is very compelling to have these friendly, warm, gourmet mushrooms, follow us into our grave. And then Jay Rimley goes on to show some experiments where the mycelium was grown onto fingernail clippings and hair follicles that show that this mushroom can in fact decompose our bodies. As a little sidebar to this, and something that I think is relevant for a lot of this video, is something that many people who don't cultivate mushrooms understand, is that I don't use spores to cultivate most of the mushrooms that I grow. I very rarely use mushroom spores. I only really grow mushrooms from spores when I absolutely have to, when there are no other options available. This sounds very counterintuitive because spores are like seeds. The mushroom produces all these spores, and if you want to grow more mushrooms, you want to propagate mushrooms, you collect the spores and you add them to the soil or the wood, right? Well, oyster mushroom can produce billions of spores, and to get the necessary mycelium, we're two a mommy and a daddy spore that are compatible mate, and two nuclei become a part of this dikaryotic mycelium that can grow. That when you lift up a tree branch in the forest and you see all these white webs of mycelium growing in the leaf litter, that is dikaryotic mycelium. That is two mycelium that are compatible, that mate and continue to grow, and then eventually we get the spore-bearing reproductive part of the mushroom, the fruit body. But when billions of spores are dropping from the oyster, they're not all very useful, and they're not all going to find a compatible spore to form dikaryotic mycelium with and join together. So it can be very, very time-intensive, expensive, and tedious work to work in a lab to take spore swabs with thousands and thousands of spores and on petri dishes or growth medium, grow out all the dikaryotic mycelium, and then weed out which ones are weak and which ones are strong. And then sometimes the ones that are strong have misshapen fruit bodies or characteristics that are undesirable. So sometimes you have to grow out many of them, and this work can take months. It can be very tedious. For mushroom cultivators, for farmers, generally we share and collect isolated cultures either from the wild or from other mycologists or farms. So when I can get a shiitake strain from Japan or another mycologist that has very desirable traits, it's very tasty, it's a very prolific fruiter that has very high yields. Finding that on my own just by rubbing spores on a petri dish is not always very effective. Sometimes you can end up with very weak mycelium, and it can be very difficult work. It can be very, it will require some very, very good scientists to do that work properly. Another way to get a very good mycelium culture or good mushroom culture is to find mushrooms in the wild. So when I find a mushroom growing in the forest or in the street, nature has already done that work for me. All of these spores that are floating around in the forest, the one that ended up being the fruit body, the oyster mushroom growing off of the log in the park, that is the survivor of many trials, many spores, and this is the one that was able to survive in the wild and produce this beautiful mushroom that I have found and can now take back to the lab. And rather than collecting its spores, I can break open that oyster mushroom and take a little sample of its interior flesh, and the vegetative part of this tissue, when I put it on a petri dish, will grow out more mycelium. So I crack open the oyster mushroom. You can even do this with grocery store mushrooms. You can crack them open and take the living inner tissue and put that on a petri dish so that mycelium will grow out. And with that petri dish of mycelium, I can cut that up, add that to more petri dishes, and I'm expanding that mycelium. So from one petri dish, I can keep expanding it. I can eventually feed them to logs. And from one petri dish, I can expand it, to 1 million pounds of mushrooms. Some species, some varieties, some isolates are much better at expanding than others. Some of them are a little bit more reluctant. Things like cordyceps, they don't always stick around for very long. They don't want to be cut up and divided so many times, but that's primarily what the work that you were doing when you were cultivating mushrooms. And this is, I mentioned this sidebar because spores are unreliable. That's not to say that if you embed spores into a burial suit, those spores won't germinate underground and grow out to have healthy mycelium. I know here the goal is not to have fruiting bodies come out of the ground, but you might not even get germinating spores that will find compatible other spores, form dikaryotic mycelium, and start growing. Also something to mention with spores is they don't always want to lay around on textiles for days, weeks, months, years, going through all of this processing, going through a burial, going through the funeral, being out in the sun for God knows how long during the funeral, getting buried underground after all those conditions that are really not replicating how those spores would move around and adapt in the wild. I haven't really studied shiitake spores and what the breeding protocols for a species like that entails, but it seems like a very unreliable and very inconsistent method to reliably have decomposing mushrooms growing on a dead body. There's also the problem of burying people underground. Like I said, these are mushrooms that have evolved to grow on hardwoods. They can grow on roots underground, but when you start to get deep, these burials for with the infinity suit are done in shallow 4-foot graves, not the traditional 6-foot deep graves, getting buried 6 feet under. So these 4-foot shallow graves that you'll find in green cemeteries and green burial practices are less anaerobic, meaning that there's more oxygen available. As you kind of put more soil on top of a dead body, things become more anaerobic. There's less oxygen available. They're basically, organisms are suffocated under there, and you need special organisms that don't need a lot of oxygen or don't need oxygen at all in order to thrive and be a part of that decomposition process. So can the shiitake, the enokis, and the oyster mushrooms grow at these depths? I'm not really convinced by that. They're not really going to have a lot of growth medium that they're evolved to feed on. Maybe they'll eat some of the textiles, but is this a very effective method? With a lot of this, we don't really have a lot of studies done by the Infinite Burial Suit people in the company to back up any of these claims. We're just sort of taking their word for it. So yeah, I'm skeptical because this is not how these mushrooms behave in the lab. They're not how they behave in the wild. And it's not how they behave on a farm. So when we're burying them 6 feet under on dead bodies, I need to see a lot more evidence to be convinced that it will work. And I'm not the only person who has expressed concern. I believe that the backlash and probably ineffective approach to using these mushrooms for these burials was the demise of this company. The Infinity burial suit does not exist anymore. There's also the component, the washing away our sins, washing away the toxins that are in our body. When we talk about remediating toxins, we're grouping a lot of different chemicals and metals and all sorts of things. We're sort of grouping them all together and saying the mushrooms will help do something with these chemicals. I'm a fan of micro-remediation, but the mushrooms don't just make all the bad things go away. We're going to need some more precise science to address these sort of things. So as much as I love the idea of not putting toxins in the soil, that's a nice idea. I resist this idea of the simplistic microremediation strategy of just throwing mushrooms at the problem and telling everybody that, oh, the mushrooms, they get rid of all the pollutants. And in some cases, mushrooms are good at that. Mushrooms can break down the hydrocarbon bonds and oils and plastics. They can break down polyurethane in some cases. We'll talk about that a little bit more in this video. But you can't just say that there's these toxins in the body, and when you put the mushrooms in there, we're addressing that problem. The JRIMLY doesn't ever seem to provide studies or scientific papers to back up any of these claims, and I don't see a lot of testing that was made available to the public to back up those claims as well. So great intention. I was very seduced by this project. I wanted to walk around in one of these stylish burial suits when this video was making the rounds. The TED Talk really hit at a moment that was really early to the public's interest in mushrooms, particularly in the West, in Europe, and the United States, where there's sort of a renaissance in terms of our relationship to fungi. 2008 was a very key moment for people to be introduced to these sort of concepts. So it had a big impact on me. This was before the mainstream sort of groundswell that we saw around mushrooms towards the end of the 2010s. But so she was really on the pulse. I think she's a great designer. It was a very provocative project. It got people talking. People asked me about the burial suit all the time. But this project didn't have the legs that we wanted it to. And many people have written about this. Another thing I should mention is the keratin protein that we find in our hair and in our fingernails is very difficult to break down. And in fact, Basidiomyces, the white rot mushrooms, the shiitakes, and a lot of the mushrooms that you're familiar with, the Basidiomyces are famously not very good at breaking down this protein. JRIMLY in her presentation shows the mycelium growing out of our fingernails and hair on petri dishes, and I don't see a lot of further evidence that the mycelium, beyond just growing across these materials, is actually breaking down the keratin. There's so many scientific studies to show that these Basidiomyces can't really do that. So even if we were to create those conditions where that mycelium can thrive and reliably grow 4 feet underground on these burial suits, I don't think it's going to do much. This is not even mentioning the bones, which are even harder to break down. So you can dig around. There's a lot that's written on keratin. I'm not, it's not something I know a lot about. I'm not an authority or somebody who's really able to get into the weeds of how keratin breaks down and what sort of organisms can do that. It's something that I'll talk about in relation to any of these burial practices, is how the nematodes and the microbes that are in the soil, the insects and the bacteria, play just as much of a role as the fungi, if not much more. And again, I'm not an authority to say which of those microbes are more important than others, whether, so much in the beginning is on the bacteria and the nematodes, but to just throw shiitakes at the burial and say that they're doing all of these things that we don't have a lot of evidence that they are actually doing those things is not very, very good science. And you don't need a PhD to sort of see that with everything that we know now. Before the company closed down, there was one very high profile burial with the actor Luke Perry, who is famous for his role in Beverly Hills 90210.
Luke Perry is helping the Earth even after his death through the unique way he was buried. Perry was laid to rest in an eco-friendly mushroom suit rather than in a casket. It was one of his final wishes. My dad discovered it and was more excited by this than I have ever seen him. He was buried in this suit, one of his final wishes, Perry's daughter Sophie shared on Instagram. The biodegradable suit costs $1,500 and has a button-up material with a hood and face cover, according to the Coeo company. They are made from mushrooms and other microorganisms that speed up decomposition. Luke Perry died after he suffered a massive stroke in March 2019. He was 52 years old.
And to be clear, I'm not mentioning this to say that, Luke Perry was very irresponsible or foolish to do this. Whether or not those mushrooms broke down or took care of all of the toxins in his body, it really doesn't matter. So much with burial and death rites is about ritual and culture and intention. It was very meaningful to him, and I think that's not something to overlook. I think this was a really good intention with this project. I think it was very provocative, and I can see why someone would have, buried themselves in this suit.
Two birds with one stone. Although birds are no longer the problems we need to kill, the idea of achieving two goals simultaneously still remains very much a part of the human experience. Every day, we use over 400 million gallons of fuel. There is so much compost in the world. We're looking in the eyes of two horrible birds, and we just need a rock that is big enough, efficient enough, and innovative enough to bludgeon them. That rock is an idea. My idea to create a car that runs on compost. So how does it work? Well, it's quite simple. Instead of using gas, it uses compost.
The Loop Living Cocoons are biodegradable mycelium composite caskets that were launched in 2020 by two Dutch designers.
The Loop Living Cocoon is the world's first living coffin, which allows humans to become one with nature again. The sustainable coffin made from Dutch soil is grown from mycelium, the underground root network of mushrooms. The Loop Living Cocoon is suitable for traditional burial, cremation, and natural burial. In 45 days, it will merge with nature, where it enriches the soil and becomes a source for new life.
Who use mycelium very similar to the mycelium I use in my studio. I'm assuming Ganoderma or Pleurotus, an oyster or a reishi relative, to grow out the mycelium on a hemp substrate and then dry those materials to something that a body can be placed inside of, buried underground, and according to the company, these caskets, these cocoons, will biodegrade 3 weeks after the burial. And I actually believe that this is true. I am very familiar with these composites. These are the same composites that I create in my studio. The hemp fibers and the substrate that they are using to grow these cocoons are very similar to the substrates that I am using to make my boat and many of my sculptures. So the company says that these grow out in about 7 days, and they help return the earth to the soil. And the company actually doesn't make any big claims about toxins or this wood-loving mushroom breaking down the body. So this is sort of a difference and something that I give more credibility to the loop cocoon for, because this is actually a very simple project. It's a biodegradable casket. Is a mushroom needed? Does the mushroom break down the body and help it decompose and take away all of its all of its toxins? I don't think so. These are wood-loving mushrooms. They're also dried. This material doesn't have the strength and cannot be preserved for the funeral until it is dried. Depending on how the mushroom is dried, if it's not dried in a kiln, in many cases these cultures can be reactivated in a lab setting. So you can actually dry out a piece of reishi, and under the right circumstances you can get that mushroom to come back from the dead, if you will. This isn't observed very commonly, and even if this were to happen underground, the Ganoderma or Pleurotus wouldn't do much to help with the decomposition. So I don't have any criticisms of the company. I don't think that we need a biodegradable coffin to compost a body. We can do very similar work by burying our loved ones in a shroud. We can add other plant materials to help compost the body, to give nutrients to the microbes that will help decompose this body. But the mushroom is doing very little, and the company doesn't claim that it's doing anything that it's not, as far as I know. I do see people in the comment sections and the people reposting stories about this cocoon saying that, making all these claims that are reminiscent to what was said during that TED Talk about the infinity burial suit. But I have to assume, I haven't met with these scientists in the Netherlands. They seem to know what they're doing. These cocoons aren't terribly expensive to make. They're not difficult to make. This is a composite, just like the composites that I've outlined in my compendium that you can make with a number of different plant materials. It doesn't have to be hemp. So I don't have a lot of issues with the Loop Living Cocoon. The next company I want to talk about actually wasn't trying to decompose corpses or feces.
NetZero is a mycelium orb that helps you capture your carbon footprint in your lawn. NetZero forms symbiotic relationships with plants and stores the carbon they capture in the soil. Here's how NetZero works. Dissolve your orb in a watering can or hose sprayer and water your plants. NetZero is a non-toxic, one-time application that requires zero maintenance and lasts 10+ years. NetZero extends plants' root systems 1,000-fold. Under the soil, the mycelium network allows plants to communicate and even share nutrients, including carbon. In exchange, plant roots share 50% of their carbon with the mycelium, which stores it in the soil nearly indefinitely. Your NetZero orb is capable of capturing 1 ton of CO2 a year. The average American emits 20 tons per year.
Most of the information that I have on this company comes from this one BuzzFeed article, this expose called "Magic Mushrooms. This Scammer is Twisting Science in a Scheme to Save the World. Joseph Kelly has an easy fix to climate change, and he'll take down anyone who tries to stop him from selling it to you." This was published in 2021 by Zara Hirji. I love this article. I think about this article all the time, at least once a week since it's been published. So this unfolded for many months leading up to this article coming out. This is a bit explosive. This man, Joseph Kelly, who has changed his name many times and has questionable business practices, had started this Kickstarter saying that he had developed a mycelium orb with a number of scientists. And this mycelium orb, nobody knows what's in the mycelium orb, but this futuristic bath bomb could be dropped into a watering can, and you could spray your residential lawn down to inoculate your grass with a special secret mycorrhizal fungus that would sequester lots and lots of CO2 from the atmosphere, and so much that it would actually offset 3 automobiles. It would pull 1,000 pounds of CO2 out of the atmosphere. So if this is even remotely true, this person should get a Nobel Prize. but nobody had heard of this person. The facts were a bit fuzzy, and I saw this campaign before the BuzzFeed article getting promoted on my feed, and I saw tens of thousands of dollars rolling in. And my friends and I were sort of elbowing each other like, yeah, check out this. This is ridiculous. Why are people giving this person money? This looks like complete bullshit. Well, it was much worse than I realized. Christian Shorts also took notice of this. Christian Shorts at the time was a professor at UC Santa Cruz, incredible mycologist, Mushrooms of the Redwood Coast, published mycologist who I have an infinite amount of respect for. Christian started digging into this company deeper than anyone else, was calling the institutions that gave special certifications for this company and the product that they had developed, and these institutions were saying, we don't know who Joseph Kelly is, or we actually didn't certify this product, that should be taken off of their Kickstarter. Just everything seemed a bit thin. Names that were on the Kickstarter weren't really that closely associated with it, or didn't really realize what their name was being put on. Joseph Kelly had developed this product by testing soils and plants. It started in Scotland, it came stateside. None of the research was done well enough or thorough enough to say that this procedure was sequestering thousands of pounds of CO2 out of the atmosphere. Also, just a little sidebar about sequestering CO2. Mycorrhizal fungi sequester CO2. When people hear that and they read Entangled Life, the part that sometimes get missed is it's not that fungi are just pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. Burying an oyster block in your backyard doesn't, make more oxygen or pull CO2 out of the atmosphere. So mushrooms need oxygen and they produce CO2. So they actually, unlike plants that are producing oxygen through photosynthesis, oxygen is not one of their biological byproducts. But when we talk about, all the CO2 is held in our atmosphere because of mushrooms, it's because some of these mycorrhizal mushrooms produce a protein called glomalin that kind of slows down metabolic breakdown of soils, basically prevents them from decomposing or composting too fast and releasing all of this extra CO2 into the world. It just kind of slows down the metabolism of the earth. And so this was discovered by a scientist in my lifetime. Glomalin is really interesting, but it's not this thing, again, where you can just throw mushrooms, at a backyard and solve climate change and solve all the problems. These claims about how much CO2 is sequestered by mushrooms gets really abused for things like this. So Joseph Kelly, before doing this Mycelium Orb NetZero project, his company is called NetZero, he had another very notorious project called the Navajo Bee Project. And after seeing Paul Stamets's TED Talk, 10 Ways Mushrooms Will Save the World, Joseph Kelly latched on to two parts of that TED Talk. That mushrooms were growing around Chernobyl, and that these radiotrophic mushrooms are actually thriving in places with high amounts of radiation. So this is known. They're not oyster mushrooms and maybe the gourmet varieties you're thinking of, but yes, there are fungi that thrive in outer space in these environments that are uninhabitable to humans because they have such high levels of radioactivity. Joseph Kelly also latched onto the part where Paul Stamets, something he talks about a lot, how bees rely on some of the metabolic discharge from mushroom metabolism, where they basically produce these antibiotics that the bees can use to kind of prevent diseases. Some people really kind of challenge these claims that Paul Stamets is making, but the idea is that if mushrooms are available in the garden, that the bees could be protected, and that this may be the cure to colony collapse, and preventing colony collapse is mushrooms. So you haven't seen a lot of this work done at scale. I have always wanted to see more research on some of those claims. I'm not debunking it. So how does this apply to Joseph Kelly? Well, he decides, okay, well, we got to grow mushrooms where there's a lot of radioactive material to save the bees. Where can we do that? A uranium mine. So he goes to this Navajo community and he tells them, I'm going to raise all this money for you guys to be beekeepers. I'm going to give you beehives. I'm going to train you. And in the first year, he raises $10,000. They're putting beehives around this community near a uranium mine because the mushrooms are going to provide the antibiotics to make sure those bees thrive. It's, if you kind of think about it for more than 2 seconds, it doesn't make any sense. So he raises $10,000, about a dozen families in the Navajo community get the beehives. He goes on to raise all this other money. He starts linking and pushing into the 2015 Bernie Sanders presidential primary campaign. And he was telling people, after donating to Bernie's presidential campaign, donate to the Navajo Bee Project. So really trying to get progressives, kind of activist-minded people who care about the environment, care about indigenous communities, to just throw money at this word salad of a humanitarian environmental project. As you can guess, that money never made its way back to the Navajo community. They were very upset. The money seems to have just disappeared. And this is all recorded in the BuzzFeed article that I've mentioned. So Joseph Kelly's kind of a strange man. He raises over $160,000 for this Kickstarter campaign for the Mycelium Orb. I believe he had changed his name before starting this project after the Navajo Bee Project in 2015. And there's really strange markers on that. You can look at the Kickstarter, it's still online for some reason. Every $50,000 benchmark, he pledged to make a food forest at completely random places in the globe. There's one food forest that will be made in Costa Rica. At $100,000, he unlocked a food forest in Kenya. And then at $150,000, they planted a food forest in Tel Aviv, Israel. There's no information on that. It's the stretch goals on the Kickstarter. They were a little short of the $200,000 goal of a food forest in Bhutan. Again, just all over the map. He's just kind of throwing everything at the wall. At $250,000, this is funny, the backers will receive a free 6-month subscription to the NetZero app. Yeah, anyways, none of it makes sense. Read the BuzzFeed article. Somebody should make a movie script about this man. I really want to know what he's doing now. I cannot seem to find him. He is a complete ghost on the internet. Before this BuzzFeed article comes out and people stop giving to his Kickstarter, Christian Shorts is writing blog posts about all of the things he's finding out about Joseph Kelly and all of his concerns about what people are giving money to. And Joseph Kelly retaliates very strongly. He's sending Christian all these harassing emails. He makes a fake seeking arrangement, like a sugar daddy profile, and sends the profile to UC Santa Cruz to try to get Christian fired, saying, hey, look at this profile. And it says, Daddy Dom looking for little girl mistress. Joseph Kelly completely makes this up, and we know this because the screenshots that he sends to UC Santa Cruz have the edit profile button, meaning that whoever took the screenshot had made the profile and was able to edit it. So if he had just stumbled across Christian's profile, that doesn't really make any sense. And I think his Gmail avatar is even in the screenshot. Completely absurd. That doesn't work. UC Santa Cruz swats that away. And then he tries again. He makes a website of a 19-year-old girl's, 19-year-old woman's testimony about how Christian had assaulted her while she was a Christian student. The student doesn't exist. UC Santa Cruz looked into it. All of the screenshots on the website where she posted her testimony included little Gmail avatars belonging to Joseph Kelly in the corner of the screenshots. So this person was very, very bad at even his smear campaign. Pretty incompetent. I just find this whole case really fascinating because I believe that this ties into all of this misinformation around mushrooms and the promises that they bring, and how this misinformation can be used in bad faith to sort of swindle people out of their money for medicinal products or junk science, what have you. I see so much of this, and this is one of the reasons I want to make this video. So this company, it doesn't really exist, and it doesn't relate to feces or dead bodies, but I think it's related to all the other things I'm talking about in this video, because I think if we don't look at this stuff critically and really, hold these companies accountable, then somebody like Joseph Kelly can show up. And again, the other companies I'm talking about, these all seem like well-intentioned people trying to genuinely make the world a better place. I have skepticisms and all of the things that I'll be talking about in this video, but they are not Joseph Kelly. Joseph Kelly is a different monster. He's a different kind of person, a different kind of company, but I think it's worth mentioning. Again, make that an HBO show. Somebody make the Joseph Kelly movie. Send me updates. Joseph Kelly, if you're listening, thinking about you all the time. Hiro Diapers is a very high-profile mushroom startup based in Austin, Texas that I have been seeing a lot of.
Did you know that fungi can actually eat plastics? Hi, this is Mickey, a globally acclaimed inventor of all things pee, poop, and periods.
And this is Taro, 13th generation farmer and the mushroom guy, and he also happens to be a Finnish elf. Over the last 4+ years, we've teamed up with top mycologists and chemists to harness fungi's potential to break down plastics. You may have heard people talk about a plastic crisis or reference that giant floating plastic island in the ocean twice the size of Texas, but do you really know how bad it is? We produce 430 million tons of plastic each year. That's 900 Empire State Buildings made entirely of plastic every year. And where does it all go? When you throw something away, where is away? 91% of plastic isn't even recycled. It piles up in landfills, pollutes beaches, and chokes our oceans.
This company gets a lot of press. They're in Forbes. Its co-founders are doing interviews all the time. And it's a very well-funded operation. Plastic diapers are a massive problem. It's a huge waste stream. It's a big source of plastic waste on our planet. And what this company has done is they've made a plastic diaper. It is a plastic diaper. But when the soil diaper is to be discarded, they have provided a special spore packet to throw into the soil diaper, close it up, throw it in the landfill, and according to this company, the spores will germinate. They will begin breaking down the plastic and human waste in the diaper after it has been dropped into the landfill. And according to the company, this fungus will continue to decompose even in anaerobic environments where the diapers are buried deep in the landfill. So in environments where there's not a lot of oxygen, I guess these fungi will still be able to do their thing and break down plastic. So I mentioned earlier that there are species of fungi that can break down plastics, polyurethanes, and oils, asphalt. We know of over 100 species that can do this. There's this famous discovery from this group of students in the Amazon forest who found a fungus that can eat all these plastics. A lot of these claims can be really overblown. If we could really break down all of our plastic and single-use plastic waste at scale, I think we'd be seeing a lot more of it. We have so much plastic. These are really observations that are made in labs and small tests. It's considering how much plastic we have on Earth. I am not really convinced that we can address all of it with fungus. That's not to say we shouldn't research this, but sometimes those facts are presented a little Pollyanishly, a little naively, that fungus, again, are going to come in and fix all of the problems. But I'm going to put all that skepticism aside. I'm going to assume that this magic blend of mushroom spores that are thrown into the dirty diapers does decompose the poop and the plastic. I don't know. I've tried to look at the patents that this company has put out. I've read their interviews, and they are not saying which fungus they're using. They are not using Pleurotus or Ganoderma mushrooms or shiitakes, as far as I know. So let's say they have a blend. They have cutting edge science. They have a lot of funding for their R&D. They have developed something where this plastic does actually decompose. Let's just say it is. They said they're going to release a study in 2026 to back up some of these claims. That's not available at this time, so I'm just going to take their word for it. I've not seen it done. If the diapers are decomposing deep in the landfills, alongside all this other plastic that is already in the landfill, are we doing much to address a problem with an over-reliance on plastic? Is the production of these plastic diapers protecting us from the microplastics that are ending up in our oceans and in our body and passing the blood-brain barrier and ending up in all of our organs? All of these very alarming studies about how we are affected by microplastics. Does this plastic diaper that only decomposes once it's in the landfill really protect all of those environmental hazards, of those health hazards? And if it is ending up in the ocean, it doesn't seem like it can decompose there, so then that's just another diaper in the ocean with an extra spore packet floating around. I might be missing something here. This company is very tight-lipped. Seems that they're holding their cards close to their chest, but I have not seen the study to show that all of these diapers are actually decomposing. I'm not convinced that diapers decomposing in a landfill is doing very much. The last thing I want to say about Hiro Diapers is this feels like ethical consumerism. And if this product is actually sustainable and living up to all of these claims, it still relies on all of its users and buyers using the diapers as they're intended. So every tired, sleepless parent who changes their baby's diaper has to make sure that the spore packet gets in there properly before it goes out in the landfill. You can educate your customers, you can have them really committed to a cause, but are these results going to be consistent and reliable? I am not sure I am fully convinced that that is possible.
We've just opened the first mycotoilet here in the Botanical Garden at UBC. My name is Joe Damon. I'm the director of the Biogenic Architecture Lab at the School of Architecture and Landscape Architecture at UBC, and this is a mycotoilet. It is a self-contained, waterless toilet that uses the roots of mushrooms to break down waste naturally and efficiently. So according to the UN, close to half of the global population lacks access to adequate sanitation, which is a leading cause of mortality worldwide. And we wanted to address a problem of global significance that's also ripe for kind of transformation. This modular composting toilet that will help them approach their waste more sustainably in a variety of contexts. So this is just the beginning. And we hope that if you come to the Botanical Garden and nature calls, you'll give it a try.
The mycotoilet made its debut in September of this year, 2025, by a group of researchers at the University of British Columbia. And they had developed a mycelium composite outhouse liner to help decompose the urine and feces that would be used at this outhouse. So as soon as I see a project like this, I immediately start looking at all their promotional materials, all of their videos, and it's a little difficult to suss out what is happening with this project. From the videos that I have seen, they are creating a mycelium composite very similar to the mushroom casket that we saw, the cocoon. It's probably a hemp or sawdust substrate that they have grown a Pleurotus or Ganoderma mushroom onto and then dried. It is clear from the videos that it is a dry, no longer living mushroom. And again, these are not mushrooms that have evolved to eat feces or manure or compost. These are wood-loving mushrooms. You can feed them cardboard and other forms of cellulose, but they are not eating feces. Not only are they not eating feces, but this toilet liner is dried. It is not a living mushroom even, really. I don't know how they kiln dried it, but that it is not active in managing this waste. So this toilet liner, according to their videos and their website, it is making the toilet less anaerobic, therefore less stinky. That this sort of padding that all of the waste can sit in is decomposing in a way where it's not releasing all of these smelly anaerobic kind of smells. So I don't know. Do we need mushrooms to do that? How much is the mushroom providing? I've seen a couple of things about mushrooms decomposing waste associated with this project, and I don't get any indication that that's actually what they're doing. I would hate to be the person that has to handle the mushroom liner and move it out to whatever compost pile. They said that they have to move it just a few times a year to replace the liner. So I'm not saying that this is hogwash. Can we not create these same, non-anaerobic conditions with packed straw or something that doesn't require us to grow a mushroom liner? Are we just sort of throwing mushrooms at this project because it's attention grabbing? It's hard to read between the lines, but again, this is a inert, biodegradable styrofoam that people are shitting and pissing on, and I guess it's making things less smelly. It's probably true, but from most of the pushback that I have is for the people responding to this project saying, wow, finally mushrooms are helping clean up our waste. It's not really what's happening. This is not so different than adding straw or hay to a compost, a compost toilet, or black water solution. Just adding those browns that you would to a compost to kind of slow it down, make it less stinky. I don't think that mushrooms are really necessary here. So it's kind of a soft criticism. I would like to know more. I probably would like to go visit this toilet and use it and see how smelly it actually is, but I'll take their word for it.
At Pact Outdoors, we make it easier and more sustainable to poop in the outdoors. Introducing the Pact Lite, an all-in-one bathroom kit for backcountry adventures. It holds a week's worth of supplies in the handle of the shovel and weighs just 4 ounces fully stocked. Toilet paper wasn't made for the outdoors. Pact wipes unfold into a wet towel with just a squirt of water. Free from chemicals like PFAS, they're FSC certified so they come from responsibly managed forests. And they decompose by 95% in 75 days. Pact tabs use fungal mycelium to break down poop faster and then kill harmful bacteria. Add 3 to the whole, fill with dirt, and let nature do the rest. Always be prepared with the easiest, most sustainable way to poop in the backcountry. Pact Outdoors, bathroom kits for outdoor adventures.
Pact Tablets. Use for faster poop breakdown. Great for all outdoor adventures. I started getting ads for this product about 2 years ago. They're all over social media and they sell them on REI shelves. These are little wooden dowels. They're screw dowels, the ones that I have here. If you kind of work in a wood shop and you countersink a screw into a desk, you hammer these over the screw to cover the screw so you don't see it. These are supposedly inoculated with a mushroom that will help break down your poop. And it's marketed towards people who are spending time outside, backpacking, hiking. I started digging around to see how these tablets were made, what the environmental impact of using this product and introducing this mushroom culture into wildlife could be. I wanted to know what species that they were using. At the time, this information wasn't available on their website. There's a lot more information on their website, including the species, but 2 years ago I went digging and I found a patent that they had applied for, and they were using Rugoso annulata, Stropharia rugoso annulata, wine cap mushrooms, which compared to the shiitake, the enoki, and these wood-loving mushrooms that I talked about earlier in this video with the infinity suit, this is actually a better candidate. I could see why somebody would use these. I remember a Oakland remediation group that was using this wine cap culture in straw wattles in areas of Oakland where there was sewage sludge backing into the streets, and they wanted to use this mushroom to kind of remediate these areas and kind of clean those kind of toxic sites from the neighborhoods and the communities that lived around this sewage sludge. So I've seen this mushroom thrive in outdoor garden beds and remediation projects and really toxified soils. It really likes company. It likes worms and a rich microbiome and compost. Need maybe probably some amounts of manure. It is actually an edible gourmet mushroom, not the tastiest mushroom, but I've grown a lot of them here in Los Angeles. It's the easiest to grow outside. It actually hates the clean, sterile environment where I grow all my other mushrooms. So the really clean, sterilized substrate that I prepare for shiitake and maitake, this mushroom will grow very slowly under those conditions and not have very vigorous, stimulated growth on a bag of oak sawdust. But I have done it. They just do a lot better outside. So I see why you would pair these for a poop address, but I wanted to test it. I wanted to see not just how this particular species would do with my own feces, but how this kind of delivery system, this form of inoculum with the dowels would actually work. So before I started digging holes in my backyard, I brought these back to the lab. In front of my flow hood, I opened this with gloves on and pulled dowels out with tweezers and tried to grow this culture out on nutrified agar, malt extract agar, MEA, very, very common agar formula used to cultivate mushrooms. I've used MEA hundreds of times for all kinds of mushrooms, and generally it's just fine. It's worked for other Stropharia rugoso and a lot of that have passed through my lab. I threw these tablets into bags of sterilized oak sawdust. Like I said, it's not a culture that loves a big bag of oak sawdust like the shiitakes, but just to see if that would be an environment where I at least see some sign of growth, I threw them into jars and bags of sterilized wheat grain spawn, which I've also used with most of my mushrooms and also with this culture. I didn't see any sign of Rugoso annulata. I didn't DNA barcode the cultures that I photographed, but these are common pin molds and trichoderma and, common fungus that you would find on, your clothes and your table surface and on the ground outside. They're just airborne everywhere. These are the things that I try to keep out of the lab because they just, they appear everywhere and they outperform my gourmet mushrooms. So no sign of Stropharia rugoso annulata. All the petri dishes revealed something very different. And people watching this video could say, oh yeah, well, you're a bad scientist or you did it wrong. Well, I grow mushrooms all day, all the time, and I've never had this problem. And so maybe I got a bad packet, but I tested the packet with a method that I use all the time with very sterile lab equipment, and I did not see any of this mushroom. So far, not so good. After doing my lab test, I brought this packet to my backyard. It was summertime, and in my backyard in sunny Los Angeles, California, I dug holes 6 to 8 inches deep. I made sure that I was more than 200 feet from water and trail. My backyard, I fit that description, and I popped a squat, did the deed, threw 3 of these inoculum tablets into the hole as described on this package and buried the hole with dirt. I'm not going to show, you know, images of poop at any point in this video, but there was no sign of mycelial growth. I waited 2 months. I dug it up. Any moisture that is in this dry Los Angeles soil in the summertime is just going to be pulled out. It's not enough for a mushroom to grow, even if it was ready to grow on human feces. So sort of a bizarre strategy. The package says store in a cool, dry place. But this packet's, you know, presumably supposed to be able to be used anywhere at any time of the year. It doesn't say don't use in, you know, 30-degree weather in the wintertime, and it doesn't say that there are problems when you do this, you know, in temperatures above 95 degrees in a dry Mediterranean climate in Los Angeles. So presumably you can grow this mushroom anytime. That's not how, you know, I've used wine cap mushrooms. I have a very particular time of the year. If I want to make a wine cap garden bed, I start in November before our rainy season. We have a winter rainy season in this Mediterranean climate, and that's very different than when you would make a wine cap garden bed in Washington State or St. Louis, where they have very different seasons, very different temperature swings. We don't have deep freezes here. Most of our mushroom action is in the winter time, so there's no mention of seasonality. On their website, they've started to add more information, like don't do this in alpine regions. So in addition to like not pooping near water systems, which you should never do, you know, these high elevation alpine regions should be avoided. It seems like, you know, some places are really fragile, and probably you shouldn't be pooping in them at all. The company says that you should follow, you know, local regulation. If you're in a park that says don't poop in a hole, the company's not telling you to poop everywhere. Is this an invasive species? That gets a little tricky. This species is found all over North America, all over the United States, from coast to coast. That still kind of glosses over a lot of nuance where, you know, alpine regions, high elevation, desert regions, you know, the desert region has a very different ecosystem than the one in Los Angeles. So, you know, is there any nuance in that? At no point is there any implication that inoculating your poop with this mushroom for faster breakdown will produce a fruiting body that, you know, we're not expecting mushrooms to come out of the ground and drop spores. But I was able to dig up these holes where I pooped months later, and there was just really no sign of anything. So maybe you could say, oh, the mushroom did its job, it all broke down. But this is just what poop looks like when you leave it 6 inches underground in dry soil. It just kind of petrifies. I found the tablets, and there's no sign of mycelium growing. Just like my lab, you just had holes of dried poop, and you know, poop is not really smelly after a couple months, all dried out. It's just dust pretty much. So not the most rigorous study that I did, but at no point did I ever see the promised wine cap mushroom growing. So these are not refrigerated spawn. You know, when I'm making even wooden dowel inoculum to hammer an oyster mushroom into a oak log, I keep those dowels in my fridge. These are very fragile organisms, particularly when they're you know, used as spawn. You can't just leave them on an REI shelf and let them roll around in the back of a truck and just expect that they'll grow anywhere. It's sort of an interesting business model, because these places where the poop is inoculated, they're not really tested. So people are throwing these on steamy, fresh, warm poop and told that mushrooms will grow, and then you just go finish your hike and no one really goes back to test it. So I haven't really seen the evidence on their website that it works. I see kind of evidence about what this species, Rugoso annulata, can do to address poop breakdown or remediation. There's kind of whispers of that this will help with bacteria and some of the more polluting parts of human feces, but no really hard claims that I can pin them to. I think the main thing is, like, this is just a bit bizarre. Poop will already break down. I mean, there's not a problem of, we don't see rangers on TV saying, oh, people are leaving this poop and it's just not breaking down fast enough. I'm more concerned about maybe where people poop. I don't know if introducing these species is really the best idea. Maybe somebody could convince me. It seems like intervening in habitat in general is something that I would personally try to avoid. I have pooped outside on trails. I'm not saying that that doesn't happen. I think pack it up is the best, most ethical, way to navigate a landscape, to leave no trace. But hey, I've been in a situation where I didn't have the right tools or willpower to carry my feces back to my car and then drive it back to Los Angeles with me. So I don't know what to say. Pact Tablet is interesting. I want to see more evidence that this actually works. I don't want to see evidence of what Stropharia rugosa annulata can do. I want to see why these dry tablets that I got from REI without an expiration date are actually growing the mushroom that it says that it's growing. And then I want to see that not only is that mushroom viable and sitting on that shelf for a year and still usable in all of these different environments and all of these different seasons, I want to see that it actually decomposes. Hot, steamy poop, fresh from the source. Do we need mushroom startup companies to decompose our corpses and our poop? I'd say inconclusive. It's inconclusive for me. I say inconclusive because even when I'm most skeptical of these companies, they address real world problems, things like burial practices. If mushrooms allow us to have better burial practices where we don't spew mercury into the atmosphere, we're not using embalming fluids that pollute, have this high environmental impact, that's all good for me. I sign off on that. I don't really believe that an extra mushroom is needed to solve some of these problems. Personally, while the biodegradable mushroom casket is nice, it's good intention, that's going to be really meaningful for some people, I personally don't need that. I say dig the hole, do my compost burial, have somebody prepare the plant materials, throw some nice flowers on my hole, cover me up. I don't need the mushroom casket, but that's also fine. I just, with all these examples, there's never really a strong argument of the mushroom doing something that we couldn't do without the mushroom. So some of these ideas are interesting, and mushrooms can break down plastic and do all these incredible things and help us remediate, but how do we use these consistently at scale to solve some of these problems from observations that we observe in the lab? I don't know. I see a lot of interesting ideas that are really underdeveloped and under-researched that get funding and just sort of move out the door. I'm already imagining that people are going to come for me in the comments saying that mycotoilet is not a company. That is a project at University of British Columbia. I'm sorry, but it has the sort of, pitch deck feel of a startup company, and it's sort of presented in the economy of new ideas. So I'm grouping them all together. Sue me. But yeah, I think it's good to talk about these things. It's good to be excited by mushrooms, but mushrooms are not going to bring us to this utopia where climate change is just washed away. But I'm not cynical. I'm a realist, but I'm not a cynic. I think we just have to talk about these things critically. We have to share what we know. And I make mistakes all the time. If I got everything wrong, let me know. Send me an email. If people are actually watching these videos, let me know. This is kind of a one-off, but if people find this meaningful, I could be persuaded to make more videos like this. This is just a subject that I find pretty exciting and I've wanted to share because I don't see other people talking about it. So let me know. I just want to say I love all of you. I love you so much. Thank you for watching my video. Bye.